Hello, everybody. So, next in the lecture series of Environment and Road Safety Awareness, we have the lecture Food Chain and Food Web as a part of the chapter Ecosystem. So, without taking much time, let's begin. So, studying about food chain and food web. So first of all, what is food chain? It's the flow of energy in an ecosystem in one way process. So here the flow of energy always takes place in one direction. Like first of all, solar energy is utilized by the plants to form organic matter, which is further being fed upon by caterpillar, frog and hawk, and it is never the reverse way. Energy never flows in a reverse way. The sequence of organisms through which energy flows is known as food chain. So the sequence of organisms through which this energy is flowing is known as food chain. Or in other words, we can say the process of one organism eating the other and in turn being eaten up by the another is called a food chain. And during this process, both energy and food is being circulated from one trophic level to the next trophic level, from one organism to the next organism in an ecosystem. So, in a food chain, each organism obtains energy from one at the level below. So, as I've already explained, the energy is being taken up from the lower trophic level or from the lower organism and is being further passed to the next organism, and it never flows in the reverse manner. So, plants are called producers because they create their own food through photosynthesis. Now, dear students, here, first of all, the food chain starts with producers because producers are the plants that produce their own food by utilizing sunlight by the process of photosynthesis. So these are known as producers, whereas other organisms, they are feeding upon these plants and hence they are not producing their own food, so they are consuming the food from another organism and are hence known as consumers. So animals are consumers because they cannot create their own food. They just eat plants or other animals to get the energy that they need. Now here we can see an example of a food chain. Like these producers or plants, they are getting the solar energy from the sunlight and they are just capturing that sunlight and converting it into carbohydrates or into organic matter by the process of photosynthesis. Now, these producers are producing the food themselves. That's why they are known as producers. Whereas these next organisms like the grasshopper is feeding upon these producers. And again, the frog is feeding upon grasshopper, snake is feeding upon frog, hawk is feeding upon snake and so on. So all these organisms, they are feeding on other organisms to get their food. That is, they are not producing their own food. So all of these are known as consumers. So the first consumer that is feeding on the producer is known as primary consumer, whereas the second, the frog, second in chain, that is feeding upon this grasshopper is known as secondary consumer, next tertiary consumer and final consumer. So the food chain goes like this. And in other words, we can say that grasshopper, as it is feeding upon the plants, it is known as herbivore, whereas all the other organisms that are feeding on other animals for the food, these are known as carnivores. So here, if I draw an imaginary line between grasshopper and frog, so grasshopper will be classified as herbivore, whereas frog, snake, and hawk will be classified as carnivores. So here, the first carnivore that is feeding upon the grasshopper, this is known as the primary carnivore. Next carnivore that is feeding upon the primary carnivore is known as secondary carnivore. And the next consumer that is feeding upon the secondary consumer is known as tertiary carnivore. So after death and decay, these organisms are being decomposed by the decomposers such as fungi, bacteria, etc. So there are three different types of food chains. First one being the grazing food chain. The consumers utilizing plants as their food constitute grazing food chain. And this food chain begins with green plants. That is the producers. So here we can see an example of grazing food chain. So here the food chain is starting with the producers, that's plants. So these plants are being fed upon by caterpillar the consumer, which is again fed upon by frog, and frog is in turn being eaten up by snake, and snake is in turn being eaten up by owl. So this is a grazing food chain starting with a producer or a plant. Next, we have detritus food chain. So, as the very name specifies, this type of food chain starts from the dead organic matter of decaying animals and plant bodies to the microorganisms, and then to detritus feeding organisms and to other predators. So, dear students, here dead and decaying organic matter is being fed upon by the decomposers, and this type of food chain starts from here. So this is leaf, the leaf fallen from a tree. So it can be a leaf or a flower fallen or a rotten fruit can be fallen from a tree, or in other words, some dead and decaying organisms can be there over at this point. So in this food chain that we are seeing over here, leaf is there as a starting point of this detritus food chain as a source of organic matter, which is being fed upon by caterpillar. Caterpillar is again being fed upon by chameleon, which is further being eaten up by snake, and snake is further being fed upon by mongoose. So this is the example of detritus food chain. Next, third type of food chain, we have auxiliary food chain. So an auxiliary food chain is also known as parasitic food chain. It involves parasites feeding on hosts, resulting in energy flowing from larger organisms to the smaller ones, without the host necessarily dying. So dear students, earlier we were seeing that the smaller organisms were being fed upon by the larger organisms. But it is reverse in this case, because the host is larger in size, whereas it is being fed upon by a smaller parasite that is residing on it. So each organism can be having a number of parasites residing on it, and this makes the auxiliary food chain. So this type of food chain can be complex and involves host and their parasites. So example can be seen over here. First of all, we are having green plants that are being fed upon by sheep as a primary consumer. And next, there is a liver fluke, which is a parasite residing on the sheep. So this type of food chain is known as auxiliary food chain. Next, coming to the significance of food chain. So dear students, the knowledge of food chain helps in understanding the feeding relationships as well as the interaction between organisms and ecosystem. So here, by knowing the concept of food chain, we come to know that what type of organism is feeding on which organism and in turn is being fed upon by which organism. So there's a balance maintained in the ecosystem. There's an equilibrium in the ecosystem that is maintained by the nature. Like one organism, it is feeding on one another organism, and in turn it is being fed upon by the another organism. So by understanding the concept of food chain, we can understand the equilibrium that is prevailing in the ecosystem. Moreover, we come to know about the interaction between the organisms and the ecosystem. So it also helps in understanding the mechanism of energy flow and circulation of matter in ecosystem. So as we are seeing in the food chain, energy as well as the organic matter, it is passing from one level to the next level and in turn to the next level, and it never flows in the reverse manner. So even this concept can be understood only by studying the food chains. For example, energy and the matter, it is passed from the producers, the plants, to the herbivores, and from the herbivores to the carnivores, and from the carnivores to the secondary carnivores and the top carnivores, and it never flows in the reverse manner. So the understanding of this concept can only be developed by studying the food chain. Further, it also helps in the understanding the movement of toxic substances and the problems associated with biological magnification in the ecosystem. So here we can understand how the toxic substances, they are being accumulated in the ecosystem and are causing adverse effects. Even that can be understood by the knowledge of food chain. Next, coming to the food web. Food web can be defined as a network of food chains which are interconnected at various trophic levels so as to form a number of feeding connections amongst different organisms of a biotic community. It is also known as consumer resource system. So dear students, in nature, a food chain never prevails in isolation. So there is always an intermingling of the food chains. Like one organism, it can feed upon a number of organisms, and in turn, this organism can be fed upon by a number of other organisms. So, in this way, there is always an intermingling of food chains in nature, in practicality. In practical circumstances, never a food chain can stay in isolation. So, as we are seeing the example over here, this is the food web prevailing in a forest. So, it starts with green plant. Here we can see a tree in the form of green plant or producer, which is being fed upon by goat, grass, or a mouse. And further, this goat can be fed upon by lion or the jackal. Similarly, this rabbit can be fed upon by jackal, wild cat, or some another organism. Similarly, mouse can be fed upon by rabbit or by the wild cat or by the owl. Now further, this jackal, wild cat, these can be fed upon by lion. And similarly, this mouse can be fed upon by snake. And further, this snake is eaten by kite. So a number of food chains are there which are prevailing in the nature, and they go hand in hand to form a food web. So this is an example of food web in forest. Next, we have a food web in grassland ecosystem. So here in the grassland ecosystem, first of all, the producers are present in the form of grass. Now this grass is being fed upon by grasshopper or by the rabbit or by mouse. So here we can see that this producer can be fed upon by these three organisms that can be seen in the picture. Further, this grasshopper can be eaten by the lizard or by hawk. Similarly, mouse can be eaten by snake or by hawk. And similarly, these consumers can be fed upon by hawk. So, there are a number of food chains that are found intermingled among themselves in this grassland food web. So, this is another example of a food web. So, with this, I hope you are having a clear understanding of food chain and food web by now. So this was all about food chain and food web. So see you soon in the next lecture with ecological pyramids. Thank you.